Inheritance and composition are two tactics used in programming to reuse your code as much as possible. Inheritance is very widespread, but I think there's a lot of times where composition would fit a little bit better. Let's say we have this setup. We have a player, and this player can attack, has health, and a hitbox. Alongside that, we can accept user input. And similarly, we have an enemy. This enemy can attack, has health, and also a hitbox, as well as some enemy-specific stuff like AI. In the world of inheritance, we would take the attack, health, and hitbox and drag them out to their own individual class. We'll just call this class entity, and the player and enemy will extend from this class. This moves all our code into one easy to change spot, so if we ever have to modify the code, it'll affect both the player and the enemy at the same time. We don't have to go digging through every class that has the ability to take damage. And if that were the end of the story, inheritance would be the perfect solution. I mean, right now, this is really easy to comprehend. But let's bring in another object. Let's say we have a tree, and similar to the player and enemy, the tree can take damage. So we can extend entity, but this causes a small problem. While we do have the health and the hitbox, now we also have the ability to attack, which we probably don't want from a tree. There's also a more potent underlying issue. Because we're using Godot, both the player and the enemy extend character body 2D, whereas the tree extends static body 2D. In the world of inheritance, at least in Godot, you can't extend from multiple classes. Since player and enemy both need their own character body 2D code, entity must also extend character body 2D. However, since tree also extends from this entity class, that means it must also be a character body 2D. There's a few ways around this, and the most straightforward approach is to change tree from a static body to a character body. This isn't ideal though, because this gives the tree the ability to move. Alternatively, you could extract the entity class out into a static entity and a character entity and decide which classes need to inherit from where. But as you can see, this is already getting a little bit complicated, and all we did was add a tree. There's got to be something better. Let's rewind a bit. Instead of using inheritance, we'll approach this with composition. Instead of making one superclass, you instead make multiple components. So for example, we would have an attack component, a health component, and of course a hitbox. Then the player and enemy would both just have their own list of components that they need. In this case, we have 3. Let's bring back in the tree from the earlier example. Because components don't care what class you're extending from, we can simply attach a health component and a hitbox component to the tree. And we're done. That's all the hierarchy we gotta worry with. You can see in this case, this is a lot more preferable to inheritance. And there may be a few odd things, like telling the hitbox component where your health component is so it can send information about taking damage, but I think that's a valid trade-off. In Godot, each of these components would actually be a child of the player, enemy, or tree node, and you can arbitrarily attach them to any node that you feel needs these components. So for example, let's say we bring in a bullet. Well, for the bullet, we want an attack component, but we also want a hitbox component. It doesn't matter how much HP a bullet has. If it hits something, it's going to destroy itself, so we don't need a health. This is the basic idea behind composition. Let's go ahead and jump into Godot, and we'll build through a project where we use composition. Alright, back on the project from last video, I've gone ahead and removed any reference to the damage functions from before. I want to build back the damage functions from before, but using composition as a base. First off, I'll add a new node 2D to the enemy and call it health component. I'll also add a new script to this. Starting off with the script, we'll add a new health variable, a max health, and inside of the ready function, I will set health to max health. Then I'll add a damage function and take in an attack from last video and subtract that damage from the health. Then if the health ever drops below 0, the parent will free itself. Back on the enemy, we'll add a new area 2D object and call it hitbox component. You may notice a warning about the shape, but we'll get back to that later. We'll attach a new script to it. We'll start by exporting a health component variable, then add a damage function, also passing in an attack like before, and then we'll check if the health component exists. If it does, we will call .damage on it. And the health component variable can be set in the inspector, like so. One thing I don't really like about this is we can attach any node 2D to this health component variable. And for example, if I attach the sprite 2D, this would crash because sprite doesn't have a damage function. So instead, one thing we can do is inside of the health component, we can declare a class name health component. Then instead of just using any node 2D, we can specify that we want specifically a health component. Then inside of the inspector, we can see that it only highlights things that classify as health components. This is also nice because this gives us IntelliSense. So if I do control space inside of this function, we can see what it expects. Or if I control click damage, it will take us to the declaration. Let's go ahead and save these off to their own branches as health component scene and hitbox component scene. One thing you may run into is if you previously assigned the health component and you go into the hitbox component scene, you'll see that it's already pointing towards a health component. You can leave this if you want, but it may cause issues in the future. So I usually just clear this and assign it for every enemy that I create. Alright, let's talk about this warning now. So, a hitbox needs a shape, and your first instinct might be to put it inside of the actual scene. And while that would work, this means that every enemy and every object that uses hitbox component would have the exact same hitbox shape. Instead, what we'll do, in the enemy scene, we'll actually attach a collision shape as a child of the hitbox component here. This allows us to use unique hitboxes for every single object. Inside of the scene, you can also set up collision through here, or you can do it in the enemy. So for example, an enemy and a player would want different collisions, so you can set it in their respective scenes. And the last thing I'll do is set up my weapon to attack a hitbox. So for this, I'll check whenever we collide with an area, we'll check if it has the function damage, and if it does, we'll construct a new attack like before, and call the damage function passing in the attack. We can also do something neat with this code. If I head back to the hitbox component, we can also declare class name hitbox component here. Then inside of the weapon, instead of checking whether it has the method, we can see if it's a type of hitbox component. If it is, we'll pull it out into a variable and call .damage on that. This has the same benefits as before, where we can do control and space to see what the function wants, or we can control click it to see where the function is declared. And that's actually all we need to do for composition. If I walked up to this cow, I can hit it. I'll also throw together the tree and the crate just to show you how easy it is once you've got these nodes set up. I'll start by dragging in a health component and then a hitbox component. And inside of the health component, I will set the health to 30. And inside of the hitbox, I will drag in the health component. Then of course, I'll add a shape to the hitbox, give it a capsule shape, and fit it to the tree. Then of course, for the crate, we can drag in a health component and a hitbox component. I'll attach the health component and set the HP to 20. Then I'll add a new collision shape of a rectangle. And just like that, if we go in the game, it takes 3 hits to kill a tree, 2 hits to kill a crate. Hopefully this shows you how powerful composition can be. Of course, it isn't one size fits all. Sometimes inheritance is better, sometimes composition is better. But of course, that's how everything is in game development. Hopefully this makes game development easier for at least someone out there. And as always, have a good one.